Part got around 500 views, which is quite a lot. I put a lot of effort into making the video pretty long, but yep, this is now the world after the American Civil War. There are two factions in the world, as we all know, and the world is about to enter another Cold War. China versus USA. Of course, regardless if a civil war happens or not, China is still one of the biggest powers in the world. And as explained in the last episode, China's military took control of their government and swiftly took over Taiwan as well. Well, giving China Taiwan as well. China has created a sphere of influence around the globe in countries like Pakistan, Nepal, and South Africa, and of course its allies of Venezuela and Cuba as well. America has allied itself with many right-wing governments, including Brazil, Canada's new leadership, France, Italy, Austria, Hungary, Poland, Estonia, Sweden, and the UK. And of course, Modi's India. I don't know if Modi's still the leader, but he is pretty old, so they have someone new. Japan and South Korea were the old American allies as well, including also the emerging power of East African Federation, which hates China because of what they did to Africa. But Zambia is also, friendly towards China. But yeah, how will this world go? How will the dynamics of this world go? Yep, because just because this is the American ally system or the Chinese ally system, things will change as governments change, governments collapse, government change, and stuff like that. So yep, this is now 2020. This is now 2030. The year 2030. Yeah. The first thing that happens is a war between Egypt and Ethiopia. This war is over the canal. Sudan allies itself with Ethiopia. Yeah. And the war begins. Egypt gets outmatched. Egypt is basically, in a couple months, is practically starved to death and loses. And basically, Egypt is unable to stop the dam from being built. Which, yeah, it will determine which country is the future. Also, Europe will now have to deal with yet another refugee crisis, which, yeah, Europe is saying not this time. The first refugee crisis was already hard enough. Countries like Turkey having to deal with these problems as well. Also, Syria finally unifies after defeating the rest of the Kurdish armies, with the help of the CCP. Syria thanks China and officially joins the Chinese alliance as well, making it another member in China's alliance. China becomes the second country to land on Mars. USA and China become the first two countries to land a person on Mars. The colonization of Mars will begin. But of course, since we're not going to roll a fixer for Mars, I'm not going to put who claims what lands in Mars. Same thing at the moon. The next space race will begin between China and America as well. With also India, France and Japan helping America, and China's just doing it by themselves. And also Russia is still putting stuff into space, but Russia is not really doing too well. Despite taking a lot of Ukraine, almost half of the country, Russia's economy is in shambles. The Russian government collapses after Putin's death. The rest of Ukraine seek their independence, and of course, Chechnya gains independence. So that means because of the collapse of Russia after Putin's death in around 2043, well, yeah, Russia does still exist, but it has become a rump state, like it already is. Russia has basically become a rump state ever since the fall of the Soviet Union. Also, Kaliningrad is now an independent country as well. And Russia is just a backwater rum state that just exists now. But I wonder what will happen in Russia in the future. So, since they no longer exist, Turkey and Greece go to war. There wasn't really much rant, but Turkey does not seek to take over Greece. They seek to take control over Cyprus, which is divided. Since no one is helping either country, Turkey has caught up with Greece in terms of technology, and with a superior population, kick off the Greeks off of Cyprus, which substantially pisses off Greece as well. And Europe realizes that their population crisis has gone out of control. Europe has a new wave of pro-life governments basically taking control as well. Pro-life governments taking control of the governments, basically promoting similar because of what happened in Hungary, Poland, and Italy. Raising the birth rate worked in all three countries. Most of Europe and Japan and Korea and China copy it. Also, in this timeline, abortion is now starting to get banned in a lot of the world because countries like China and North Korea see abortion as a new problem, even though they were perfectly fine with it before. Mostly because China wants to have more people, and more people they can train in the Chinese army. Same thing with North Korea, as well. And a lot of countries basically don't allow abortion for basically, certain reasons. Because of this world, mostly in Europe, mostly because of this world demographic crisis. And actually, in many European countries, having kids, and of course USA and Canada, or North America, having kids is strongly encouraged. But one other problem is also here. Well, Venezuela officially collapses as a country. Yep, Venezuela officially collapses as a country. The Chinese government basically seizes Venezuela and installs a puppet regime in Venezuela, so it doesn't become an American ally as well. Nigeria starts a civil war between the northern part of the country and the southern part of the country. Here, all countries labeled in pink are all countries of ongoing civil wars. Iraq, Central African Republic, and Nigeria are all ongoing civil wars. Where it's, a civil war also starts in Russia. Since the Russian economy collapses in the rum state, a communist revolution starts again in Russia to restore the Soviet Union. Russia now wants to restore the Soviet Union and is now in yet another civil war. Because of the poor state Russia is in, Russia is even poorer than countries like Ukraine and Moldova. Because of Russia's economic collapse in this world, despite taking over half of Ukraine, Russia's economy practically tanked after Putin's death. So, Russia basically and also there's also a far-right front in Russia as well, while it also seeks to aim control of Russia. Another problem is Saudi Arabia. Yep, Saudi Arabia forms a new pact, which is basically a pact that is anti-Iranian. Iran is pissed off at this, since the Iranian Revolution did work, but Iran is still an enemy of Saudi Arabia, and will do anything to get the revenge on Saudi Arabia in this world. The new Iranian government, which is basically very similar to the last one, but Iran's basically more militaristic, blames everything on the Saudi Arabia. Instead of making America the number one enemy, Saudi Arabia is now this new Iran's worst enemy. This Iran despises Saudi Arabia and blames everything on Saudi Arabia. They also still hate Israel and somewhat hate America, but nothing as much as Saudi Arabia and Iran. Now the new battleground is Iraq, which is currently in the midst of a civil war in this world as well. Another war is the crowd. This is the war between Morocco and Algeria. Yep, they're at war again. Basically, this war is basically for Western Sahara. Morocco enlists the help of Mauritania against, but also Western Sahara, which seeks independence from Morocco. Ultimately, the crowd's war on Morocco go. And now there's a complete war between Morocco and Algeria. Oh, I forgot Somalia. Somalia, for some reason, still in a civil war. A new resource is found in Africa, which is basically a new element that nobody has heard of before. It is found basically in the deep around here. The countries that have discovered it is the Central African Union, Angola, and Zambia. Yeah, I basically took this idea from Kiev mapping, but I like this so much. And also, it's something very similar to marble and vibranium. This new material is very strong, and even stronger than titanium. Will these three countries become superpowers in the future as well? In 2047, the final rebellion groups in the DRC is crossed by the Central African government, though by the East African government, which also renames itself to Central African Union. The East African Federation crushes all opposition forces in South Sudan and DRC, which the government promised to get rid of all civil unrest in Burundi, DRC, and South Sudan. There are still some conflicts remaining in these areas, but the East African Federation still wants to remove some. Basically, yeah. The East African Federation is basically a country that looks similar to many parliamentary countries. All countries get equal representation in their country, and basically whoever controls the parliament of East African Federation wins. This is so to make sure countries like Rwanda and the DRC is represented. It's very similar to the US. Well, there's a House and a Senate. Well, basically the Senate is... There's around 5 electors per country. So for example, Kenya gets 5, Uganda gets 5, Burundi, these guys get 5, these guys get 5, and these guys get 5, which is a total of 35 senators in the country. And also the House, there's at least around 200 plus members of the House. But East African Federation continue on expanding, as Somalia still seeks to have entry into the East African Federation, and even Ethiopia. Will East African Federation become the next China, as Africa's population also continues to explode? Sierra Leone also has another governmental collapse and goes into yet another civil war. Another one of the most unstable countries loses. Despite this, the East African Federation and Botswana are basically the most stable countries in Africa. The East African Federation adopts government styles similar to Rwanda, while corruption is basically ruled out at all costs, and basically freedom, tourism, and capitalism is promoted amongst all else. And also, the East African Federation since biggest goal is to having a stable population growth. Not too many people, but not too low people. Which is something that countries like the United States, now Hungary and Poland and Italy have done. The fertility rate currently in the East African Federation as of 2038 is around 3.2, which is still pretty high. It still varies upon region. For example, Congo is 4.7 and Kenya is 2.5. Somaliland is finally recognized as an independent country. Somaliland has been fighting for decades to gain its independence, but Somalia finally said, you know what, Somaliland, here's your independence. Also, yeah, the Yemeni civil war ended as well. Libya goes into yet another civil war. Yep, that's not too surprising. A couple countries seek to enter the American sphere of influence, but seek to enter the right-wing sphere of influence, including the Czech Republic and including the Baltic states. Russia's civil war in 2040, Russia's civil war is over. Russia becomes a communist dictatorship, as China basically funded the communists to victory. The far-right party lost despite America's funding. Dean. And now the Russian government flees to Ukraine of all places. Says basically create a government that does not control its land. I don't know what the term is used, but yeah, it's basically one of those types of governments. Well, they consider themselves a legitimate government, but they don't control any land. Where it's still basically, yeah, they're a government in exile, basically. So yeah, the Russian government has basically been exiled to Ukraine and the USA. The Soviet Union reforms itself and attacks Chechnya for leaving Russia. Chechnya is swiftly overtaken by the new Soviet Union. Even though this country is far different than the original Soviet Union, it follows a CCP style form of government, which is loyal to China as well, which is pretty bad for this world. Also, the Second Sand War comes to an end. Morocco loses the war and is forced to accept the independence of Western Sahara. A new border is decided then in the Western Sahara, which means Western Sahara is officially a new country. Also, in 2045 and 2044, French Guiana votes to gain independence, which means French Guiana is independent. Scotland also did try to vote for independence, but they failed. Yep, they failed. They're still not an independent country. New Caledonia also votes for independence as well, which means New Caledonia alongside with Somaliland and French Guiana are the world's newest nations, following Bougainville, which became independent in 2027. And of course, the East African Federation was formed in 2026. The new Soviet Republic, the neo-Soviet Union, was formed in 2040, and of course, the three new countries which all gained independence in the same year. And also Somaliland was gained independence in 2049. Western Sahara and French Guiana gained independence in 2045. And of course, New Caledonia gained independence in 2042. China seeks to basically make Mongolia a puppet state. Surrounded by China and Russia, China either threatens war or to become a Chinese puppet. Mongolia becomes a Chinese puppet. America, realizing that they don't really have any allies in Asia, they seek out one of the few only American-friendly countries in Asia they have, Vietnam. Despite being a communist country still, Vietnam and China hate each other and despise each other. So much, Vietnam is willing to not be allies of China No, despite being two similar governments. Also, there's another reason why America became allies of Vietnam, because China, of course, still claims the South China Sea, which could explode into World War III if not careful. Sri Lanka also becomes a Chinese ally as well. Well, after the socialist trend re-election in China and Sri Lanka, which pledged their loyalty to Sri Lanka, which becomes a full-fledged one-party state. Belarus finally is a democratic country. After Lukashenko's son dies, well, he has nobody to rule Belarus. So Belarus basically becomes a democratic state by default. Another Balkan War begins. Yep, another one of these. And it's basically in 2047, it first starts as Kosovo trying to gain independence again. Even though Kosovo is an independent country, Serbia tries to retake Kosovo yet again. Which this is not a good thing. Albania and Bosnia, and Bulgaria immediately rush to the side of Kosovo. Meanwhile, Romania and Moldova and Croatia rush to the side of Serbia. And Greece rushed to the side of Serbia because Turkey declared war on them. This is one of the worst wars to probably have happened since the American Civil War and the Russian Civil War. Also, China and its allies are sending help and resources to Serbia. Meanwhile, the USA is sending resources to Turkey and its allies, which causes another Balkan War. Which will probably last for decades. They'll probably last for a couple of years. Central African Civil War is finally over. Yep, it finally ended. Same thing with Somalia Civil War by 2050. Somalia applied to join the East African Federation and are finally accepted in, which means Somalia is a part of the East African Federation. Somaliland does not want to join the East African Federation, however, because they recently became independent. Somaliland is also one of the most stable countries in the world, and one of the most peaceful countries in the world, which is the polar opposite of Somalia. Somalia is basically becoming the new Botswana, an extremely stable country as well. But this is a pretty bad thing for the East African Federation absorbing a country like Somalia. That's because Somalia is mostly Muslim. Meanwhile, this part of Africa is mostly Christian, which is the reason why these countries are able to stay together so quickly. I don't think Somalia is going to stay a part of the Union for much longer. So we're going to keep the border here until they leave, which probably won't take that long because Somalia is very different than the rest of this Africa, which is becoming more homogenous society as well. Meanwhile, in the midst of the war between the Balkans in 2050, which will end around here, Armenia and Azerbaijan declare yet another war against each other as well. Georgia joins on the side of Armenia, but Azerbaijan still has way more people than Armenia in Georgia. And Azerbaijan calls for the old friend Iran to declare war on them. And Turkey. But Iran does not join. But yep, that is basically about part 2 of this series. Will World War III happen? What will happen in the Balkans? Will anything exciting happen in Africa? And yep, that's basically what this video. Goodbye.